I think we have had geopolitical, I suppose, events and tensions most recently at the weekend in Israel, and we send solidarity with the citizens and those who have lost family in that horror, that terrorist attack by Hamas. We've had the Russian invasion, we've had a COVID pandemic, we've had other things where the world is being pulled asunder almost, which requires that events like this happen so that people come together, people who are willing to work together, whether it's on the big climate challenge, but also on building peace. And because I'm from the European Union, I'm from Ireland, I also have a strong sense of hope that despite all of the, the real sadness that there is, and I think it's reflected here, that we have to have, if you like, that vision of hope that we will and can build peace, knowing that when you look at what's happening in Israel and Gaza, that seems very far away, but I think we have a duty of hope to work towards peace.
Yet, though, it just seems that multilateral institutions are going through a bit of a rocky moment, because we're talking about IMF reform, World Bank reform, and prior to this week there was also a lot of focus on WTO, UN, I could go on, right? Have we reached the point where multilateralism is essentially dead?
No, I don't agree at all, and I think it's certainly not going through a good moment. I think there's a lot of concern about the institutions, how they function, but it's within human capacity to reform and change. And I would rather look at it from this point of view. If your scenario were correct, that all of these agents and structures are dead, then what hope have we to come together? So even in the darkest of moments, I think we have to hold to the fact that people can come together and that you do need these global conversations about trade, about development, about climate action, about environmental degradation. I mean, one of the things for me here this week is not so much the official meetings, they're hugely important, but you meet people in the sidewalks, if you like. So I had a great conversation with the Minister for Agriculture here in Morocco, and as you know, I live on a farm, so I was very interested to understand how climate change is impacting his farmers, and it is, and how water, which some of us take for granted, is such an important commodity. So even those short exchanges drive me further to make sure that our work on sustainable finance, that Europe achieves its targets on climate action, rather than allowing ourselves slip backwards because there are too many other difficult topics to discuss, whether it's inflation or interest rates. So in a way, I do agree with your part of your analysis that all of these global organizations, they have some issues to do to reform. But I think it's also important that we don't let them die, that we reinvigorate them, because if they did fade, we'd have to reconstruct. I often say that about the European Union. And when we went through Brexit, there were these moments where people said, oh, is that the end of Europe? It could have been. I mean, if people had not decided we will pull together, but it hasn't been. It's actually made us stronger together.
COVID and the Russian invasion of Ukraine changed things, but I want to focus on some of the specific parts of your portfolio, Commissioner. Actually, recently I was listening to a talk from the sanctions envoy from the EU, and he made a very interesting comment. He said that unanimity is a curse. Do you agree that unanimity at this stage at the EU is actually preventing you from making further progress when it comes to sanctions against Russia?
Well, as a former journalist, I always like to see the context of the quote you made, but maybe just broadly to look at this and how sanctions work at the European level. So we have to have political agreement on sanctions. That's how we work. And we've managed to do that. There have been some difficult moments. My job is once the politicians have made those decisions and reached agreement, we have to make sure that we implement. And I may have said this to you previously, that this is an enormous task because we've never before done anything as deep and profound. We have our sanctions envoy, so he's reaching out to third countries to make sure they understand why we're doing it and how we need their help and support rather than allowing Russian circumvention. So we have managed to tie up a lot of Russian assets, both for individuals and indeed central bank assets. I think there's a bigger question now about what needs to be done perhaps in the future around sanctions, not so much just on Russia, but how Europe copes with a sanctions policy of this scale. And I think that's a conversation that the next Commission may indeed look into. But equally today, what we're focused on is making sure that those who aid and abet Russia realise there are consequences, and that circumvention, to some extent, is an affront to Ukraine, because if we don't succeed in our efforts to choke off the Russian war machine, its financial feedstock, then we're saying to our Ukrainian friends that this war continues. So all our efforts, all our strength, all our energy from my colleagues in my services is to make sure that we have implementation fully and effectively.